Welcome to the SENCOs. My name is Dale Pickles. I'm the host of the SENCos and I'm also the managing director of B Squared. If you are a new listener, if you've just found us, then welcome to the SENCos. The aim of this podcast is really simple. We want to educate everyone about special educational needs and disability, including myself. In this episode, we're discussing morphology and morph mastering. It's nothing to do with that orange plasticine Play-Doh-y character from my childhood. My guest is Louise Selby, a dyslexia specialist. Louise was a specialist advisory teacher for Hertfordshire Local Authority for 11 years. And before this, she was a primary school SENCO. And Louise now advises, supports and trains schools around dyslexia, as well as assessing. The SENCos is created and produced by us here at B Squared. We are the assessment people. We help schools to show the small steps of progress pupils with SEND make. And we can help schools to do this for a wide range of abilities and ages. And if you're a primary school struggling to show progress or struggling to identify where people isn't making progress, then we can help. And if you're looking for what to do children working below year one or children working a couple of years behind, we can definitely help. But did you know you can also use B Squared assessment software for more than just pupils with SEND? You can now assess all pupils in a primary school in one system, saving you time, saving you money, and simplifying the whole assessment data reporting to governors process. Visit the B Squared website or click on the meeting link in the show notes to book a meeting with me to take you through our assessment software and how it can help you. Now, let's get on with the podcast. On this week's show, we're discussing morphology and morph mastery. My guest is Louise Selby, a dyslexia specialist. Louise was a specialist advisory teacher for Hertfordshire Local Authority for 11 years, and before this, she was a primary school SENCO. Louise now advises, supports, and trains schools around dyslexia, and she's also written a book on morphology and is currently writing more books around dyslexia. Welcome to the show, Louise.
Hello, it's very exciting to be here.
You are very, very welcome. When I hear morph mastery, I'm thinking plasticine, but that's a different thing.
Tony Hart, yeah, morph.
Yes, love it. So everyone knows about phonics, whether they like it or not, and it also appears to be the only way to teach reading according to the English government. But phonics or phonology is only part of the English language, with morphology being one of the others. So what is morphology?
Oh, yeah, you've got me on my favourite subject there, Dale. So our English language is, in fact, made up of phonology and morphology with a little bit of etymology thrown in. So it's known as a morphophonemic language. And in fact, 80% of our words are made up of what we know as morphemes. So a morpheme is a unit of meaning within a word. So with phonics and phonology, you've got units of sound, and quite a lot of educators and parents and hopefully children know that, for example, clap is made up of the sounds k or ap. That's phonics, that's units of sound. But units of meaning are prefixes, suffixes and roots. So in the word, if you had the word clapping, you'd have clap and ing. And as you get to more complicated words, you'll find that there's lots and lots of morphemes in these words. So if you had unfriending, someone who's unfriending you, don't know actually if that is a word, but you've got 3 morphemes there. You can also go on to Greek and Latin in our language, because our language is made up. That's where the etymology comes in. We've got an old English base of our language. But as the French influence came in and the Greek influence, the Roman influence, our language is a mixture of these lovely Latin and Greek morphemes as well. So the word conduct, that comes from Latin, duct meaning to lead, con meaning with. And the reason that this is so important is because if I just use my phonics, I need my phonics, actually. We need our phonics. But if I just use my phonics to write the word conduct, I would write it conduct, but then I might write the word duct when I duck, if someone lobs a bit of corn at me, like they randomly do, lob corn on the cob at you. Think of another lesson there. If someone's lobbing corn at me, I ducked. And I wouldn't spell that D-U-C-T because I ducked. It's the past tense. It's D-U-C-K with an ED suffix on the end. And that's absolutely vital. You find lots of children who have learnt their phonics and they need to learn their phonics. But if they've learnt their phonics, they often would spell words like duct as D-U-C-T, as in the conduct, which is a different word. So morphology, it's those prefixes, suffixes and roots, those units of meaning in words, which are such an integral part of our language. Just to actually, if you don't mind, I'm going to correct you slightly, Dale, because we hear often that the government only talks about phonics, but actually they don't. We are told to teach morphology by the government. It's just that not everyone picks up on this. It is in the curriculum. So in the year 1 spelling curriculum, you've got the prefix un, you've got the suffix s, plural s, you've got the suffix ed, and those are really important because if a child uses their phonics for plays, they might write P-L-A-Y-Z, but they need to know that plural s, and they might write, if they're writing hunted, they need to know that ed, or they'd write H-U-N-T-I-D. And that is in the curriculum. But what is happening is that we've been told that intervention needs to be using systematic synthetic phonics. And I'm finding, to my horror, actually, I'm finding that schools with really intelligent, accomplished SENCOs, head teachers, advisory teachers even are approaching me and saying, I know that morphology works, I know it's important, but I don't feel I'm allowed to do anything but phonics.
There is a document, I can't remember which one it is, but came out not long ago, and it literally says, if this isn't working, do more phonics. That's literally what it says. And it's like, not anything else. If they're struggling with this, just keep doing it. And I think that bit of guidance is the bit that has stuck with people. If they're struggling with phonics, you just need to keep doing it. And you get secondary schools going, right, we're trying to do phonics with children in year 9.
Yeah, I know. And I do. I get them. And that's what I mean. I remember one child I assessed, and because I work as a dyslexia assessor as well, which is really fascinating, actually, seeing how children respond to phonics and what's happening with their spelling as they go through the school. But one child, she was in year 8, and she was it was one of the DFE recommended phonics programs, a really good phonics program. And I asked the school, what's she doing? They said, she's doing this program. And I said, well, what's the impact? And they said, well, we don't know because she's been doing it since year 1. And the problem there was that because it's like the same intervention she's been doing since year 1, she told me that she was a bit sick of phonics. And I mean, it's quite possible that she could have done phonics in a different way. I think that this isn't an either or. And actually, we do need phonics. So if I want to spell that duct, that conduct, I can remember that morpheme, but I still need a bit of phonics, actually, to read and spell it. But, your learners with dyslexia, they just need loads and loads of repetition. They need loads of multisensory work and racing through these phonics programs that are recommended by the DFE, which do work, but racing through them year in, year out doesn't work. Because sometimes it's the method, actually, that needs to change. So if I see a learner, probably not in year 9, but if I see a learner maybe in year 6 and 7 who really hasn't got any phonics at all, I'm probably going to recommend a different approach of phonics, if I'm honest, because they do need a little bit. But having said that, if they've got a little bit, but they're just not getting fluent, and this is something I see a lot in my assessments. I see children who have been taught phonics really well because actually the government phonics is good, pretty good if it's done well. It's pretty good. And they've been taught phonics really well, but they're dyslexic and they've got a phonological deficit, which means they struggle. That's in their brain. They struggle to process speech sounds. So when they come to reading and spelling using phonics, they're just working so hard. And you see them read. It's a privilege that I get to see them do this that a class teacher doesn't necessarily get to do. And the effort they are putting in to achieve decoding every single word means that they're not fluent, that their comprehension goes. And that's the issue, actually. That's why they need morphology and they need other tools, because phonics alone for these children doesn't work. They're just struggling. And then they get to year 7, year 8, year 9, where the texts are really challenging and they're struggling because they're still decoding every word, and it's just such hard work. So giving them these morphological tools is just so helpful. And actually the government does ask us to teach it, but with the intervention, they do ask us to do phonics and phonics and phonics. And, you know, there are other ways. But what I found, and I've spoken to some Ofsted inspectors about this, and actually it's not the case that Ofsted are only looking for phonics. What's the case is that Ofsted is looking for a well thought out intervention, which is measured, which is, you can explain the rationale, you can explain why you're doing it, and that you're carefully monitoring. You're monitoring how they're doing, you're keeping data. You're not just saying, well, I don't know if it's worked because they've been doing it since year 1. And if, you know, morph mastery is, if that's done well, then, and you've got the data, and you will get the data because it does work, that's fine by the government and by Ofsted, in fact. So it's a little bit of a misunderstanding out there, this sense of either or, phonics or something else. They work together.
Definitely. And I wonder if anyone else listening is literally just going, duct.
Yeah.
Duct. Why do they sound the same? Why they shouldn't. They should not sound the
So
same.
many. There's so many of those words that do helped. Really, this is one. So, and actually, this is a little factoid for you, which might, because today, of course, we're recording the week that the wonderful Steve Wright passed away. So, a little factoid for you. In 1906, President Roosevelt thought, this is ridiculous, this English language, can't we just change it and make it more simple, more phonetic, because there's so many different spellings. So like, really, why don't you spell that like dearly? So why do you write REALLY instead of REARLY? Because dearly, sorry, I'm putting a lot of strain on everyone's working memory here talking about this. Sorry. So
dearly and really sound identical, apart from the beginning sound. But the spelling is different.
And the reason for that is the morphology. But you see, what President Roosevelt wanted to do was to make it all the same and all consistent. And this failed, not surprisingly, because the language just isn't like that. There's a reason why it's real and ly, because ly makes it into an adjective or an adverb. An adverb makes it into an adverb.
He would never have liked reading in Reading.
Exactly. Reading and Reading. I'm sure there's some morphology behind that. But that's the thing, that the reason that ed is on the end of the word is really important. And that's important for vocabulary, but it's also important for spelling, because if you teach that, then children spell it. I mean, children who've learnt their phonics make so many errors by putting the T on the end instead of the ED and so on. Morphology does work. Morph mastery does work. It helps them.
There's a clip, one of the bits in Friends going back a long time, where Ross is going for a job, but the person who's going for the job for at the museum, they're both after the same woman. I can't remember the exact, it's years ago. And he says, I'll spell this words. And he says, P, he goes, there was a silent T.
Oh.
So he texts someone else and she, well, if it's do with this, there'll be a silent T at the beginning. He's like, how would you know that? And it's the either etymology or the morphology that told that person, okay, within this context, it means this, and there will be a T, like pterodactyl or whatever it is. There's a silent P at the beginning, whatever it was.
Yeah.
And it was it was that sort of thing. And when you're attacking new words, when you see a word you don't understand, that morphology helps you break it into those sections and helps you understand what it means.
Yeah, it does. It helps. So we're talking about vocabulary skills here and word inquiry, which, as you know, is a huge issue for us to teach this higher level vocabulary. And it absolutely does. It helps students to break down words, look at their units of meaning and think about why they are like they are. And if you get into more complicated words, you are looking at the Greek and the Latin, and you can see it's really interesting. So, I mean, well, not everyone gets fascinated by this. I realise I am a bit of a geek, but it does help students to just make sense. I mean, that's what it's literally making sense of words. So, one classic is the Latin root rupt. And so most of us have heard, the word interrupt, and we might use that word. We might use the word disrupt. Then we start getting into more complex words and thinking, well, what do they actually mean? Abrupt, erupt, those words. And rupt, knowing that rupt means tear can be really helpful because it gives more depth to that word. So interrupt, like literally tear between, that gives it more depth, doesn't it? And abrupt, that means tear. I think it's tear out or tear from. Somewhat, a morphology geek will no doubt correct me if you're listening, morphology geek. Erupt, I think, means tear out, and it just brings so much poetry, I suppose, to the language and deeper understanding. There's so many words that you can do that with. It's a great activity for teachers to just do, pick a word, think of as many words as you can that are linked to it, and then start to analyse them, look at what they mean, look up what they mean. So yeah, vocabulary, and actually there's, because I get quite excited about research as well, and looking at evidence, and I think it's really important to show evidence for what we're doing. And there is new evidence that using morphology can really help comprehension.
I think it is when especially when you're reading a book and you come across a word, exothermic reaction.
Oh,
Type thing like that. You're literally going, okay, so therm generally means heat or temperature.
Yeah.
Exo, I think there's exo and endo and iso and another one. I'd get lost, but it's generally, I think exo kind of gives off heat and it's a reaction. So something has happened causing an explosion or a heat. And by understanding those bits together, you understand.
Yeah.
Even if I've never read that together, if I've got those bits, like an explosion, exothermic. So an explosion is a kind of a big thing happening. So exothermic is heat being given out and it's a reaction. So you're kind of thinking exothermic is kind of an explosion. And you see that and it helps you understand what's going on in that book, even if you've never read it.
Yeah. And you see, for our dyslexic learners, that's crucial because they've got this difficulty with most dyslexics have difficulty with their phonological skills. So hearing speech sounds and interpreting speech sounds. And that makes vocabulary really hard sometimes to remember those words. And they all sound very similar, don't they?
Yes.
But what dyslexics and research is showing this, it's exciting. Dyslexics are compensating. They are compensating for their weak this is a generalization, but research has shown this. Jeremy Law has done this, that they're compensating for their weak phonological skills and using this morphological stuff, this meaning, using their meaning more. And so that's going to help them learn that vocabulary. And if in my books that I'm writing that you mentioned, they're for teachers, they're for teachers to give them strategies. And I've written a lot about how to teach this tricky vocabulary, particularly in science, because science secondary teachers aren't trained in English, of course they're not, but teaching that vocabulary using morphemes in exactly the way that you've just said is so helpful for dyslexics, and it's going to help them with their spelling as well.
And there's just words which really confuse me. So a thermometer is a tool to measure temperature.
Meter being measure. and therm. And actually, I'm going to look up those exo, iso, and endo, because I've got my book here, and there I just made a list, because do you know what, Dale? I wrote this book, and I'm no expert, and I know that in schools, the people that do the interventions are often the TAs, and they're often people who aren't experts in morphology. It's lovely if they are, but they don't have to be. So I just made these lists, and I use them all the time. And when I'm training, I always say, look, just look it up.
Because I think with Susie Nyman on, who does the multi-sensory teaching,
love her.
and she has these cards, the different parts of the words.
Yeah.
So you could have thermic as one bit, and then add on the exo as a separate card to make up different words. Once you understand what that bit, you make up the words, because you're saying, right, so it's this sort of reaction. Yeah,
and that's what, in Morph Mastery, and I love Susie Nyman, because it's all about multisensory. She's so good at that, isn't she? And
she is.
That's what I wanted to create with Morph Mastery, something that, because our dyslexic learners, or our learners, with difficulties, they don't have to have that label, with difficulties in specific things, literacy. They need that multisensory. They really need that manipulation, that multisensory. So in Morph Mastery, there's a card for every single morpheme, and there's loads and loads of wordplay. So you just the teacher or TA gets the cards out, and they make different words out of it. Gets a bit more complicated with Latin, but they're still there.
But one annoying word for me is gasometer. What's that do?
I don't know. What's a gasometer? Does it measure gas?
No, it stores gas.
Okay.
Years ago we had those big round things which go up and down storing gas. Those things, you sort of see them, and they increase as they're full. That's a gasometer.
Okay.
But no, a gasometer will be measuring, storing. Certain things, there's always something, somebody's taken a word and applied it, and they use it wrongly, and it always mucks up those lovely simple rules, and I hate that.
It does. And that's the thing. And that's the thing about our language as well, that, do you know what? For every rule, there's always an exception. And there's some words that they were just mistakes over history, and they were spelt wrongly. And that's the reason, you start looking into it. So I don't know about that gasometer, but you could look it up. I just use dictionary.com, and I look up the etymology of words, and it usually tells me where they come from. So you could look that one up.
I remember in year 9, and I can visualize this in my head, and I have this memory seared into my brain of trying to write something and going, I don't know how to spell this word. And yet it's a really simple word. And I just had a brain fart. I could not think of it. I just could not think of it. And I'm just going, I know it's not that. I know it's not that. And I couldn't think. And I walked up to the teacher, sat at a desk, and went, how do you spell done? I know it's not D-U-N. And she just looked at me and went, don't be stupid, sit down. And I sat down and I wrote D-U-N. I'm going, I know that is wrong. But I could not get to D-O-N-E.
Yeah.
I just wasn't there. I'm going, done. It's you. No, that's Dune. And I never got there.
Yeah. Well, shame on that teacher is the first thing to say, because those are the hardest words sometimes for learners. But I think what would help you, off the top of my head, what would help you with that one is knowing that it's the past tense of do. And if you know how to spell do, you put the N-E on the end. But that still doesn't explain the whole thing, does it?
It was just complete, had this, I never thought it was of O. I just was not there.
Yeah.
Going, oh my God, how have I, what? No, what? Could not get it.
Yeah. Did you know that this isn't probably just a random factoid actually, but did you know that the WR more like that letter pattern means to twist? So the word right it comes from twist. That might comfort
twisting,
quite a few people who hate writing. The word wreath, wraith, wrist. There's quite a few of them. And that can help with that WR. It can just help to remember that silent letter. That's just a random, sometimes just helping to remember spellings. It's just finding a piece of meaning that just helps you. So
and that's the thing, I think. Yeah, if you do struggle with that, but knowing Yeah. I'm stuck on WR now.
Yeah, but then if you're confused between which right to write, think, well, twisting, that's the W one. So that's something to help you with.
Because we all know, like, PAED, P-A-E-D, is like paediatrician, means children.
Yeah.
And pedagogy means teaching of children. The ped is that pedi, but it's probably a different tense or something, which is probably a Latin thing or something. But you have these connections, and when you start making these connections, your vocabulary just kind of grows.
It does, and it helps. It's a tool that helps you get through these challenging secondary subjects in particular. I mean, Morph Mastery, I actually took it right back to basics, because I found that there were a few morphological programs that did those words that we're talking about, and did them well. But the kids that I work with, and the kids that are on the SENCOs radars, are those that can't spell unzip, and can't spell says and things. And so I thought, well, actually they need some morphology. And sadly you do get children in year 7, 8 who are still on those year 1 morphemes for reading and spelling. So teaching them, pedagogy, which is that's what was available, some of those more complex morphemes. I thought, no, let's take it right back and give them a morphological approach that's highly structured, really multisensory. And we go right back to those year 1 and year 2. It does go on forwards as well, so you can use it later on. But most children who are assessed for Morph Mastery go right back to the year 1 and year 2 and those spelling rules.
Yeah.
So so if you had the word pin, P-I-N, and you added I-N-G, you'd have to put another N in. That's the double rule, double consonant rule. And that's hard. And many, many children get through Key Stage 2 and still can't do that. And then there's the Y to I rule. So happy comes happiness and it turns into an I. And then the drop E rule. So rose, you drop the E and make it into roses. And that's really hard because you just learn it as a rule, and that's random and difficult to remember. But with Morph Mastery, we make it's really visual. We use these cards. We play lots of games. We've got a colour code. We've got a colour code for prefixes are always green, roots are always yellow, and suffixes are always blue. And if they start making these words and then, say, adding a consonant in unpinning, that extra N wouldn't be a colour because it's not part of the root or the suffix. And just that can be a really helpful way for them to learn those morphemes and those spelling rules. We also do, it's really highly structured, so I make them do what are called portals. They just morphemes in a table. It's a table of 3 columns, but called a portal because it transforms words, and they very exciting, obviously. But they put the root in the middle of the table, the prefix to the side and the suffix to the other side, and they can see how that word is made up. They can see that really clearly, and then they can start applying those spelling rules, whether it's changing a Y to an I. Having it broken down in such a structured way with the colour is really helpful. There's also a handshake, Dale. There's a secret handshake with Morph Mastery that isn't at all secret because it's on YouTube, but to get them to do hand movements for each part of the word.
Okay.
So if I had unkindness, their hands would come together like a fish, because and there's ninja characters as well. So the character that goes with prefixes is called prefer, and he's got a fish on his chest. And so you'd come together like a fish. And then when you say the root, that would be the prefix. Then when you say the root, that's kind. And you come together like a cross, like the ninja for roots has got a cross on his chest. And when you say the suffix, you would move your hands like a star. And I'm doing that now just for you, Dad.
No one else can see it.
I know your listeners can't see, but you can see, just for you. So, and that really helps, doing different actions. This is what is multisensory. hopefully Susie Nyman would approve, and it helps children to break up these words and understand them. We're going right back to absolute basics of getting what is unkindness. So word like unhelped, many children would think that was two chunks of meaning, un and helped, but making them separate that into the un and the help and the ed helps them see that you spell that with an ed and not just a d. It's not, or even a t, helpt. It really helps with that meaning and that spelling, and then they're off. It's transformative. They love it.
And it's really odd when you sit there and you think. So I'm literally going through it. So when I'm reading a word, even silently in my head, you're kind of using that phonetic knowledge to work out what that word is, to say that in your head so you can read it.
Yeah.
And if you're struggling with that, even if you're silent reading, you're literally breaking that word into the little sections whereas the whole morphology approach is don't worry about each individual letter or joining that letter and that letter, working out which letter joins with which letter for each. Is actually going, oh, I know kindness. And they also learn how you get a rhythm with that as well.
Yeah. It's looking at chunks, and it's easier, isn't it, for your working memory? And you do need those sounds, and you absolutely do. And I would never want to say that this is an alternative to phonics. It's a complement to phonics, because you do actually need some phonics. But if you can interpret words according to their chunks of meaning, like you've just described, it's really helpful, because you start to think about other words that you know that are linked, and that helps you to understand a text.
And that's the thing, to me, it's that understanding. It might not necessarily help you read those individual words, but I think when you start putting words together and you're reading a sentence that you don't really understand because you haven't got that experience of being in that situation, but if you can, it helps you understand that sentence more.
Yeah, definitely. And so one of the things that, when I kind of looked into this all these years ago, one of the things I found quite soon on was this skill called morphological awareness, which is more than just reading and spelling. And the more I looked into it, the more I thought, actually, this needs to be taught explicitly for some of our learners. So basically, morphological awareness is what we're talking about. It's the ability to notice parts of word, units of meaning within words. It's the ability to manipulate them. So if I know that unkind means not kind, then I can see that maybe unfaithful means not faithful, for example. And some children, and actually some adults, so if you're listening and you're thinking, I can't see that, some don't see that. And especially some children don't see that. And so what I've built into the Morph Mastery program, and I think this is why it works so well, is training these skills. So not just focusing on, well, this week we're spelling this week we're reading this, but actually spending some time on training these skills to notice words, to pull them apart. And we do that through games. It's really fun with spinners and voice recorders and all sorts of things.
Now, I've got a question which I keep getting this wrong, and I have to correct myself every time I go to say it, that I'm going to say it wrong, and it's actually this, and it's a morphology thing.
I probably can't answer it, Dale.
I am unorganised.
Oh, right, yeah.
No, yeah. I'm disorganised.
Yeah.
And I don't know why I can't be unorganised and why I have to be disorganised. But it's a morphology thing, well, I would have thought.
What? I mean, yeah, I think it is. But I wouldn't be surprised if unorganised is now actually in the dictionary. So I'm actually going to look it up, because you're right. And that's exactly what morphological awareness is. And I actually say, and I think this is another reason why it works quite well, this approach, because I say, look, let's try it. Let's try these words. Is it a real word? So are you looking it up as well?
I've just come across writingexplained.org. And disorganised refers to something that used to be orderly or organised, but is not anymore. So my desk would have to be disorganised. Whereas unorganised refers to something that's never been orderly in the first place.
Yes, because that's so interesting, because dis kind of applies to something like disordered, something that's gone wrong.
Yes.
And so it's more biased, isn't it, in its meaning, whereas un is just not, just simply not. Dis, so unkind, not kind. Disappointing, well, that's a loaded word, isn't it? That's disappointing. It's really
It
gone
basically,
wrong.
it really, yeah. So when you think about that as disappointed, is that dis meaning it was? So at one point I was appointed. I don't know whether that makes no sense to me, but basically I was happy with you, but now I'm disappointed because I used to be.
Yeah.
It's like someone said, it's a joke. How are you feeling today? Whelmed.
I love it. I love it. I need to have you in my training. I
I'm not
love
underwhelmed. I'm not overwhelmed. I'm just
whelmed.
whelmed,
Yeah.
which technically has to be a word, but you never use it.
Yeah, and this kind of wordplay is what I love. And I say to, because I train a lot of TAs, and I say to them, you do not need to know what these words are. You just need to have the skills to explore with the children. And if they, I mean, that what you've just been talking about there, you would be on the final stage of the morphological awareness continuum, because you'd be explicitly investigating whether words exist. But as you know, many children couldn't even tell you what the morphemes are in unkind, and so morph mastery does train them to do that. But if I get a child saying, "Oh, is this a word?" I love it. And you know what was interesting, when I did the pilot, because I did quite a lot of filming. I did the pilot of the intervention in some local schools and did quite a lot of filming. And there's one bit in the film where I can't remember what the word was, but the TA and the child were playing a game, and this word came up, and he said, the child said, that's not a word, is it? And she said, no, that's not a word. And then she turned around to me at filming. She said, is that a word? And we had this chat, and actually we discovered that it was a word. And that's just brilliant, because you see how we're investigating, and you see how this style of learning is
So,
just so much.
so in his head, they basically came up with a word, which was a real word, by
Yes.
using their
Yeah.
morphological awareness.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
although I've never heard of it,
Yeah.
it should be a word. By using all that knowledge, it is a word which exists in my head.
Yeah. And because this particular game, I think it was a spinner game where you have some roots on one spinner and some suffixes or prefixes on the other spinner, and you spin it and then you talk about whether it's a word. It was that simple. And in this case, it was actually a word we'd heard quite a lot. I can't remember the word. It wasn't a really complicated word. But when you're thinking about words so much, you're just not sure, and you want to check. And it's that checking skill that I applaud, because that's what gets you really deeply into these words, thinking about them and what they mean. And that's what we're trying to teach. So yeah, if and I did some training I was in Harris Federation last week. Harris Tottenham, amazing school. Shout out to Harris there. But I was there, and we had these amazing teachers coming up with all sorts of words that they said that one really should exist. And I think there was one where they had scrib and itty, and they thought that scribity should be a word. Sounds quite good, doesn't it? And they thought human, and then the est suffix, humanist, should
The most
be a word.
human.
Yeah, that should be a word. And isn't this great to be so productive with words, rather than to say, no, that's not the right spelling, that's the wrong phonic pattern. And it really helps these learners.
I'm guessing like scribity is kind of, I'm in the mood for, it wouldn't be writing, because scribing is writing. But you can kind of, just hearing that word, roughly where it is in the world of words. You're going, oh, humanist. That's like the most humany. You must
Yeah.
humane,
Yeah.
human or
Yeah.
So it helps you think about what that.
Yeah. And I mean, that's just a bit of fun, really. But I suppose, our dyslexic learners are our kids with difficulties, especially in secondary school, have failed and failed and failed and failed and failed again, sadly. I'm not trying to condemn their ability, because they're usually very clever, but they failed in their spelling because they just struggle so much to get the phonics. And isn't it nice that, and not just nice, but actually works, that we can give them these tasks where they're producing things, where they're investigating things, where there's multiple, it's productive. We're producing, we're making multiple possibilities, and there's far fewer mistakes, and there's much more engagement as a result. Aside from all the meaning that we've talked about, it's just the way of teaching is so much better.
Is it a case of that morphology works better for older children? Because, like, in my head, that phonetic knowledge, that phonology, is kind of as you're learning words. But I think as you get older, you're hearing all these words in the environment. You're hearing them going around the science lab. You're watching the news. You're almost like your vocabulary, your hearing is growing.
Yeah.
And it's making those connections in the things you're hearing.
Yeah.
Maybe helps them where that maybe phonics hasn't worked, that morphology is coming through, because you're actually hearing those words. It helps you understand because you've watched the video, you've heard. I'm just wondering if...
Yeah, and there's definitely, so yes, it's the quick answer to that. There's definitely some research that shows that in earlier stages of reading, phonology is more influential, but in the next stage, morphology is more influential in progress in reading. And I think it's exactly what you've just said is one reason for that you are exploring words more. I mean, definitely in secondary, I just think by the time you get to your 7, 8, 9, you need something a bit deeper and a bit more interesting than repeated phonics. But I would say that, and again, it's going right back to, even if you go back to that plural S and that, those year 1 morphemes, it's still really enhancing children's vocabulary and also their grammar. There's a lot of grammatical suffixes there.
I'm just thinking, like, as you get into geography and sciences, you're hearing words like decompress, or decompression, and you're hearing these words and going, okay, I'm hearing, what does that? And if you do it phonetically, it's one thing, but actually, if you go compress, I don't know if comp would be compress, which is pressure. So decompress is release of pressure. Decompressurization is a process where you're decompressing.
Yeah, because ation makes a word into a noun, so it becomes a thing. Yeah, exactly.
So suddenly you have this huge vocabulary all interlinked that helps you understand. Yeah. So when your science teacher is saying those words, or then you start to compress, it's all going to, but if you were a 4-year-old or 5-year-old, that probably wouldn't help you.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. So the words that you're looking at are like the tier 2 words that, we do in second. Well, do some of those in primary actually as well now, don't we? But yeah, when we're looking at meaning, absolutely, it really comes into its own with those technical words. And, interestingly, a lot of those Greek and Latin words are in the sciences and the maths. And so, you think that your scientists and your maths teachers, why would they know the Greek and the Latin? But it helps to break them down. I remember I used to always struggle with the word refract and reflect, and I could never remember the difference in maths. And I'm not sure I still can, except that fract means break, and flect means, does that mean to send forward or something? I'm just looking at it.
So when I hear the word reflect, I immediately think of a mirror.
Bend or curve, it means flect. So
yes, and I always I'm going to think of was it Pink Floyd Dark Side of the Moon album cover, that triangle with the different colours of light. That to me is refraction.
Okay, yeah.
Because I always think of fraction means part of.
Well, fract means break.
Yeah, so fraction.
Yeah.
So number is to break a number into parts, so fraction. Yeah. So if you think of diffract diffracting light is that's taking white light and breaking it into the parts, the different red colours of the rainbow.
Oh, now you're getting clever.
But that's the thing. So when you see a rainbow,
Yeah.
that's diffraction.
Mm.
The light is hitting the raindrops and creating that thing. So, yeah, reflection is reflecting on yourself and looking back at yourself.
Mm.
And whereas you can't refract on yourself.
No, I would hope not.
But you do have a fractured leg, so you can.
Yeah. Yeah.
So again, what's a fractured leg?
Yeah. A broken leg. Yeah.
It's not, yeah.
Had a few of those in our household.
So immediately we've gone from science with light straight into maths. Now we're back into biology, just with that word, that part of fract and flecked.
Yeah.
Flex must be a word. If you can reflect, you must be. So I must be flecting at the mirror and it reflecting back to me. But that's a whole other thing. I won't get into part.
Yeah, well, flect it's one of those funny Latin morphemes that has to have a suffix or a prefix on it, but it's still got a meaning. It still means bend or curve. But then also, because didn't we mention that decompression earlier? So if you know what diffract is, you've just explained that to me, because your scientific knowledge is obviously pretty good, Dale. I'm impressed. D means from, I believe. So you can then start to think about that decompression and what that means as well, and link that D, which helps you to understand your science and your maths and geography, as you've said, as well.
And then you learn like oct means 8.
Yeah.
Which is why we have October.
Yeah. Yeah.
September.
Yeah.
And no.
Yeah. That's
no, it's gone.
The Roman calendar, isn't it? And when the first months were. I know. I mean, it's so.
You learn something. There's always the rule which breaks it.
I know, but I do remember nonagenarian. That's someone in their 90s, isn't it?
And a nonagon is a 9-sided shape.
Yeah, and pentagon and hexagon and all of that. Yeah,
and you get a dodecahedron, and there's a whole thing around. But once you start doing it, you link that little bit of knowledge here, that little bit of knowledge here. I now know if I see the word hexagon. Hex is 6. A gon, probably a shape, and it's a gon, so that's probably going to be a flat shape.
Yeah, well done. Yeah.
So
you've got those strategies there, and if you know, because there is a big drive in secondary on vocabulary and on literacy across the curriculum, reading and writing, and if we can equip teachers in a way that's really easy to just help children to look at these words like this. You know, you don't have to know all the Latin. You can just look it all up. There's resources to look it all up and to help them to look at these words. It's extremely helpful for that literacy across the curriculum, whether you're dyslexic or not. This is a whole class thing that's really useful. And that language, imagine if Roosevelt had succeeded, you know, we'd have all these phonic words and you know, we'd be complaining about all the phonics in our language and where's all the morphology gone and where's the history.
There's certain things I like about if you actually go into the history of our language. So Americans write the dates weird, don't they?
Yeah.
They do the month and the day then the year. Absolutely stupid, isn't it?
Oh, it's just so undyslexia friendly that's different. I've got caught out a few times, and I don't have dyslexia, but yes, that's hard.
Do you know why they do it?
Because they want to be different.
It's the British way of doing it. That is the way we used to do it in Britain. So when they went to America, they continued. However, we sat there and went at some point, okay, I think the Europeans have it right. We're going to adapt the European way. So the American way is the original British way.
Yeah.
And lots of things American have or do is the American accent is the old. It's really fascinating when you look at it. A lot of things American do is actually more traditional British than we are.
Yeah.
Because we've adapted that European side.
Yeah. That is interesting.
That's one of those random things. I went, why is American date format so weird? Oh, it's our fault. Oh dear. But yeah, that thing is, I think that morphology and just asking those questions, going, why is it that? Like that. I've always worried about, I've never known why is it disorganized or unorganized. Now I know both are valid, but depending on the context.
Yeah. So I suppose you could then have a discussion about whether you are actually were you ever organised in the first place, or
Yeah.
that's another.
Have I always been unorganised, but someone helped me organise, so now I am disorganised because someone helped? Yes.
Yeah. It's what I wanted to do with Morph Mastery was create something that people can actually use. That your practitioners out there in schools who haven't got loads of time and can't be experts in everything can use to help pupils progress. And morphology can be quite complex. It can be harder than phonics because you haven't just got your 44 sounds. But hopefully that there are some tools that that teachers can use just to get these kids learning, get them thinking, get them spelling, get them reading. And it does work. The data's good.
It does. And you think of comprehension, understanding, it's really going to boost that. It's really going to boost that in my head.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it does. Yeah.
And once you start understanding, you almost like just reading for the sake of it on its own is one thing, but in reality, we read to understand.
Of course we do. Yeah.
So if you can understand it, then the reading part is a reason to read.
Yeah, and I think that's something that is so sad. And actually that's why what started me on this journey with, there's the J word, started me on this route with morphology was I had a child that I was working with. He was in year 6 and he'd had a dyslexia diagnosis in year 3. And at that point, his language and his vocabulary and his comprehension were outstanding. By the time I saw him in year 6, they were average. And he'd had excellent phonics teaching, his phonics was okay. But look at this change in him. And that I was seeing that increasingly, these children whose comprehension and vocabulary was depleted. And when they go into secondary school, the secondary teachers aren't necessarily going to pick up that he had outstanding vocabulary and comprehension, but wouldn't it be great if these learners could find these tools to help them with their comprehension and not just battle on with trying to decode text using the skills that they've got, the phonics skills they've got, but to give them these tools as well? Wouldn't that be amazing? And then comprehension will and does improve.
Does, and even just literally when you're like in exams and you're reading a question, it's like you can literally, if you understand the words better, you can almost answer questions you have no idea what they're actually asking you, or you've no personal experience of, because you can understand the words.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, exams, it's all about understanding the questions these days, isn't it? And looking out for the right words. And oh my goodness, there's so many traps that these kids can fall in.
And just having that morphology, you can go, that bit there means this, so the answer is this. Whereas out being able to pick that up, you could go off in the wrong direction.
I think it's about confidence with words as well. And that's something that, again, on the pilot, people said that there was a new confidence that the children, and they were all primary children on the pilot, they'd seen a new sort of confidence with tackling texts, with just thinking about words, with making mistakes, and how that had improved. And they all made outstanding progress in comprehension, actually. By the way, it was the comprehension that stood out the most. It's not a comprehension intervention, it's a reading and spelling intervention, but for reasons we've been talking about, it really helped with that. Yeah, and so just that confidence with playing with words and trying things out, which they didn't have before, that's going to stand them in good stead for secondary and exams and life.
Definitely. So thank you for coming on the show today. Really enjoyed it. And I was trying to think of the thing, and literally that whole journey around compression and fract it helps you see how much they're interlinked. Just those words. It is really interesting. And I was at the Dyslexia show in 23, and there was somebody doing a talk around morphology, and it was really interesting just listening to him going, well, that bit means this, and you can do this, and and I was like, yeah, that's actually really interesting.
Yeah.
And makes you interested in the word you're reading rather than just going, actually being interested in where it's come from, the meaning and what that means. I found it really interesting. Louise has given me loads of links. So as always, I'll be putting those in the show notes. I'll also be sharing Louise's contact details and a link to her book as well, all about morph mastery. And as always, you're going to find those show notes whether you listen to the podcast or on the website. Thank you for listening to the show. If you haven't subscribed already, click on that subscribe button wherever you're listening. And don't forget, you can also follow us on social media, on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. I'm supposed to call it X. I just don't like that. Just search for the SENCast and you'll find us. And if you're struggling to show progress, if your assessment process is overcomplicated, takes too long, or you just want to see what is available, have a look at the B Squared website or book a free online meeting with me so I can take you through our products. We have a range of assessment products to help all schools show small steps of progress for pupils with SEND. And if you're a primary school in England who want to use one assessment system for all pupils instead of one for your SEND and one for your ARE pupils, get in contact. We can do it all. And you can find about our online training, our CPD, read our blog, or watch our webinars. It is all on the B Squared website. And you'll find a link to the website and to book that meeting with me in the show notes. So thank you for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the SENCast. It is goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from me.
Bye, everyone.